Is Mongolia moving closer to the West? Over the course of 2023 and 2024, Mongolia has been the focus of growing attention in Washington and key European capitals. But while many see this as a concerted Western push to strengthen relations with this strategically important country, can Mongolia really abandon its close ties to Russia and China? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Kerr-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. In international relations, some countries emerge as a critical focal point of competition between regional or international powers. This can be due to many factors such as their location, economic resources or broader political or religious influence. Known as pivot states, the foreign policy decisions of these countries can often have profound effects. For example, by aligning with one neighbour against another, they can alter a regional balance of power. Alternatively, by remaining neutral, they can become a buffer or intermediary between competing states. Sometimes they might ally with an external actor, thus becoming a vital element of foreign power projection. Needless to say, all this can give pivot states a much greater significance than might otherwise be expected from their size, military strength, or economic standing. One of the most interesting examples of a pivot state in contemporary international relations is Mongolia. Over the past several years, it's become an increasingly influential target for many outside powers. Mongolia is located on the boundary between Central and East Asia. With an area of around 1.56 million square kilometres or 600,000 square miles, it's the world's 18th largest country. A landlocked state, it's bordered by Russia to the north and China to the south, east and west. With a population of around 3.4 million, it's one of the most sparsely inhabited countries in the world. An important source of coal, copper, gold, tin and tungsten, mining is a crucial part of the country's economy, amounting to around a quarter of its gross domestic product and 90% of its exports. While Mongolia has long been home to nomadic tribes and has a history stretching back over 2,000 years, the country is most famously associated with the Mongolian Empire that emerged in the 13th century. Having united various tribes, Genghis Khan began a campaign of conquest that would eventually lead to the creation of the largest contiguous land empire in human history. An empire that at its height reached from China to Europe. However, it would be short-lived. Amidst feuds, the empire soon fragmented, and by the end of the 14th century, the Mongols had been forced back to the steppes of Central Asia. In 1635, China invaded South and Eastern, or Inner Mongolia. Half a century later, it extended its control over the northern outer areas, which were coming under increasing threat from the expanding Russian Empire. All this was cemented in 1727 when a treaty between China and Russia placed Mongolia under Chinese control. This would last almost 200 years until in 1911 the ruling Qing dynasty was overthrown. In the political chaos that followed, Mongolian nationalists declared independence. But although Chinese forces regained control several years later, in 1921 Mongolian revolutionaries, backed by the newly created Soviet Union, forced them out again. 3 years later, in 1924, the Mongolian People's Republic was proclaimed. Despite playing a critical role in establishing Mongolia, the USSR initially refused to recognise the new state. Instead, it still formally saw it as part of China, which continued to lay claim to the territory. While this decision probably saved Mongolia from becoming yet another Soviet republic, the USSR steadily extended its control over Mongolia to the point that it eventually became a Soviet puppet state. This was highlighted in 1936 when the two countries signed a mutual assistance protocol leading to the deployment of Soviet troops in Mongolia. All this came to fruition in 1945. As the Second World War drew to a close, the Soviet Union finally recognised Mongolia's independence. More to the point, in line with the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Alliance, the nationalist government in China also accepted its statehood. And even though the nationalists were defeated 3 years later by the forces of the Chinese Communist Party, the new People's Republic of China stuck to the agreement. On the 16th of October 1949, China and Mongolia established diplomatic relations. Although China had now accepted it, Mongolia would remain closely tied to the Soviet Union, becoming one of Moscow's closest allies during the Cold War. This would in turn profoundly affect Mongolia's external relations over the following decades. While Mongolia initially maintained good relations with China, signing a border agreement in 1962, the Sino-Soviet split in the late 1950s and early 1960s saw a collapse in ties, especially after Soviet troops were again stationed in the country in 1966. It also became more closely linked with other Soviet satellite states. But while it would go on to join Comecon, the main economic body uniting the socialist countries, it was denied the opportunity to join the Warsaw Pact, as many Eastern European countries felt worried about unnecessarily antagonising China. In the meantime, all this also had significant internal effects. Under the rule of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party, the MPRP, the USSR's influence steadily grew across all sectors. At the same time, Russian became widely spoken, and many Mongolians studied in the Soviet Union. After almost 70 years of Soviet control, everything changed in the late 1980s. As reform took off in the USSR, eventually leading to its collapse, pressure also grew in Mongolia. Following widespread popular protests, multi-party democracy was introduced in 1990. 2 years later, the communist system was abandoned, a new constitution was adopted, and the Mongolian People's Republic was dissolved. As with other former Soviet satellite states, the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the USSR profoundly affected Mongolia and its foreign policy. For a start, the loss of its benefactor and the collapse in trade led to a massive economic downturn and financial crisis. Moreover, relations with the new Russian Federation soured after Moscow halted its technical assistance and demanded that Mongolia repay all the aid money it had been given since 1946. As a result, Mongolia was now forced to begin building new ties. Having finally established diplomatic relations with the United States in 1987, Washington became a key target. So did the European Union, leading to a partnership and cooperation agreement in 1993. Meanwhile, other key relationships were established, including with Japan and South Korea. However, by far the most important transformation was with China. Despite their tense history and notwithstanding a lingering sense of mistrust, relations rapidly improved. In 1994, they signed a treaty of friendship and cooperation. This soon led to a massive expansion of trade and investment, especially in the hugely important mining sector. Indeed, within a decade, China had become Mongolia's most important economic partner. By the turn of the millennium, the situation had stabilised. Despite occasional tensions in Chinese Inner Mongolia, relations between China and Mongolia went from strength to strength. Meanwhile, political and strategic ties to Russia also improved dramatically. Unlike the former satellite states of Central and Eastern Europe that abandoned Moscow to pursue closer ties to the West, many Mongolians continued to view Russia extremely positively and still considered their former patron as a natural partner. Having settled the debt issue in 2004, over the next decade and a half, the countries steadily strengthened their political, economic and military cooperation. This peaked in 2019 when they signed a treaty of friendship and a comprehensive strategic partnership. But while Mongolia recognised the need for close working relations with its two immediate neighbours, fears also grew that it was becoming overly reliant on them. This was felt particularly strongly with China. In addition to Beijing's rapidly expanding global influence, many felt that Chinese firms were gaining too much control over critical sectors, including mining. As a result, Mongolia began to strengthen what it called its third neighbour policy. While good relations with Russia and China remained central to its external outlook, it steadily deepened its ties with many other countries, including key Western states, as well as building wide-ranging cooperation with the United States, which also resulted in a strategic partnership in 2019. It extended its relationship with the EU, as well as other partners, including Japan, India, and Turkey. While Mongolia now appeared to have settled into a relatively comfortable position with Russia, China, and its so-called third neighbours, all this changed in early 2022 with the start of the Ukraine war. At first, Mongolia adopted a cautious approach to the conflict. Fearful of undermining its relations with Moscow and worried about the implications of imposing sanctions, especially as it still relied on Russian energy, Mongolian policymakers initially steered a neutral course. For example, it abstained from key UN votes condemning the invasion. But while Mongolia continued and continues to have close links to Moscow, with regular bilateral meetings, as the war continued, some small but noticeable changes emerged. For example, speaking at the General Assembly in late 2022, the country's president issued a call for peace that many saw as the start of a subtle shift in Mongolia's approach. However, the most significant development has been the steady increase in contacts with Western countries since the start of 2023. In addition to ongoing high-level contacts with the United States, many European countries have also taken a growing interest in Mongolia. In May 2023, Emmanuel Macron became the first ever French president to visit the country. A visit French officials explicitly said was aimed at loosening Russia's control over its neighbours and opening strategic alternatives. Following on from this, in February 2024, Germany became the first EU member to sign a strategic partnership with Mongolia. Most recently, the British Foreign Secretary visited the country in April 2024, a trip that also laid the foundations for its own future partnership agreement with the country. The reasons for all this are unclear. Some have put it down to economic factors. The war in Ukraine has had a disastrous effect on the Mongolian economy, but some have suggested that it may reflect deeper splits within the country. While older Mongolians remain generally positive towards Russia, many younger ones take a more international outlook, often voicing a preference for the West over Russia and China and expressing support for Ukraine. On top of all this, there may well be growing nervousness about the increasingly close ties between Beijing and Moscow that have emerged since the start of the Ukraine war. It's one thing to pivot between two powerful neighbours, but an entirely different thing to be squeezed between them. Meanwhile, all this also benefits the United States, the EU, and other Western states. Besides the chance to weaken one of Moscow's closest historical partnerships, they're also keen to gain greater access to Mongolia's valuable mining sector, a point that they openly highlight in many of their statements about the closer relationship. So, does all this mean that Mongolia is now shifting away from Russia and China and decisively towards the West? In a word, no. Even if it wanted to, and there's little sign that it does, the simple reality is that Mongolia can't escape its geography. Moreover, any attempt to make a more concerted effort to align with the West could well have disastrous consequences if Beijing and Moscow then align to isolate the country. Instead, Mongolia appears to be pursuing a foreign policy that's designed to protect its economic, political, diplomatic and strategic autonomy while maintaining its close ties with Moscow and Beijing. Put another way, it isn't pivoting towards the West. Rather, as its two neighbours become increasingly close and Mongolia finds itself ever more squeezed, it appears to be pivoting towards its third neighbour, the rest of the world, including the West. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.